There are four aspects of reality that only Islam's concept of God can ultimately and soundly explain, while atheism cannot do so without falling into self-contradiction. And these aspects are change, matter, finitude, and specificity. Atheism rejects the only sound explanation for change. If this moment depended on an infinite number of previous moments and movements, we'd never exist or get here. If I were to say that my opponents can begin their speech after an infinite amount of time, they would never have the chance to start their speeches, as an infinite amount of time can't end or even begin if you think about it. Likewise, if I asked a poor student, not pointing to anyone in particular, for £1 and he didn't have it, and he asked another who was equally poor, and so on, I'd never get that £1 until the chain of students found at least one student who had £1 to begin the chain of lending and eventually get to me. Now, this is known as the infinite regress fallacy, which is the same as asserting a beginning and no beginning at the same time. It is a contradiction and therefore impossible. The existence of change and movement requires a first mover. There's no way around that. And if it is the first mover, it means it chose to move things without being moved by anything else. Therefore, it has a will. This is the key characteristic of God, whose name is Al-Mubdi, in the initiator in the Quran. 2. Atheism rejects the only sound explanation for the ultimate basis behind matter. If matter gets its attributes and characteristics because it is made from something more fundamental than it, let's just say subatomic particles and forces, ultimately quarks and bosons, and these things are made of, let's say, quantum vacuum energy or fluctuations in such thing, or superstrings, one or the other for the sake of argument, what is quantum vacuum energy, or what are superstrings, if they even exist, made of? If something else, and that's made of something else, where does it stop? If it has no end, then nothing would exist. It's like saying a branch is held aloft from the ground by an infinitely tall tree, or a pond has no bottom to hold up the water, despite the water being at a specific level. The fact that anything exists and continues to exist proves there must be something fundamental that is supporting all these things, that itself isn't made of anything else and has no parts, and therefore is self-sustaining. The Quran calls God Ar-Razzaq, the sustainer, Al-Hafidh, the preserver, Al-Samad, the self-sufficient. 3. Atheism rejects the only sound explanation for finite things. If something has size, shape, charge, or a specific characteristic, what determined these limitations in the first place? If it were determined by a finite thing outside itself, an efficient cause, going on forever, it's an infinite regress fallacy. If it was determined by the building blocks inside itself, a material cause going on forever into smaller and smaller blocks, it's another infinite regress fallacy. The only possibility left is that all forms and limited characteristics of all finite things were ultimately created by something that has no finite limitations itself, i.e. something infinite, which has no limits that need determining by something else, and therefore is the ultimate or necessary thing. And it creates all other things. The Quran calls God Al-Khaliq, the creator. 4. Atheism rejects the only sound explanation for the specificity of finite things. Things in the universe, including the magnitude of the forces of gravity, strong, weak, and force, and electromagnetism, and the amount of energy contained in the universe, are specific to a certain magnitude, size, quantity, and quality. Considering that the universe could have one quark more than it has, the question is, what determined it would be one way and not another? Perhaps the conditions prior to the universe's emergence, shall we say, led to the conditions we see now. But this only shifts the burden of explanation further along the chain. What then determined the precise pre-existing conditions before the universe that led to our universe being the way it is? If we invoke an infinite chain of pre-existing conditions to explain our current condition or the emergence of the universe, this is yet again another infinite regress fallacy, I'm afraid. The only remaining explanation is that something ultimately chose or determined by its will all things to be the way they are. The Quran calls God Al-Musawwir, the shaper. Islam posits that God ultimately created and sustained all things. He is infinite, unlimited, and self-sustaining, and He alone measured out the numbers of things and apportioned all the regularities, or what you call natural laws, behind all things. It is the Islamic concept of God that not only explains reality better than atheism, but it is the only explanation, ultimately, that can explain reality that we see, which does not possess self-contradictions, circular logics, or appeals to mystery or blind faith. The arguments of atheists, in my experience, are no different to those I've encountered from polytheists, Trinitarians, or volcano worshippers. Atheists just call their God the universe, which essentially is just a bigger volcano. Thank you.